In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, one God, amen. So God willing, today we're going to continue the book of Daniel in chapter 8. And like we said last time, this part of the book, starting from chapter 7 and onward, is very much focused on different prophecies that Daniel has seen and prophesied. And so last week we spoke about one of those prophecies, and we compared it in Daniel chapter 7 with the prophecy that St. John saw in Revelation chapter 13, and how there is a lot of similarities between them. So God willing, today we're going to continue, and we're going to study the prophecies in chapter 8. So this chapter is kind of divided into two sections. The first section is the vision itself, and the first 14 verses is what is it that Daniel actually saw. And then in the last part, the second half, Archangel Gabriel is interpreting this vision to Daniel to make him understand what is it that it means. So we start in verse 1. It says, "In the 3rd year of the reign of King Belshazzar, a vision appeared to me, Daniel, after the one that appeared to me the first time." Okay, so Daniel is referring to a vision that he had in the past, right? And the interpretation that Daniel had of that vision. Okay, so we know again that the first king that we studied in the book of Daniel was Nebuchadnezzar, right? And here Belshazzar is the second king that we read about in the book of Daniel after him. And we said that Nebuchadnezzar is the grandfather of Belshazzar. Okay, we know about him that in Daniel chapter 5, he had like this party where they were like eating and drinking, and they were using the sacred vessels from the temple that they had when they had destroyed the temple in Jerusalem and taken the vessels. They were using these vessels as part of this party, like as a kind of a blasphemy. And so this is that the last night, the last king, King Belshazzar, who was killed that very night when the Medes and the Persians attacked Babylon and took it over. So here we're speaking about in the 3rd year of King Belshazzar. So this is in the past, right? Speaking about during the reign of Belshazzar, Daniel had this vision. Okay, this vision is approximately around 550 BC. Just to kind of give a context of when this is. "I saw in the vision, and it so happened while I was looking, that I was in Shushan, the citadel, which is in the province of Elam, and I saw in the vision that I was by the river Ulai." Okay, Shushan is also called Susa. You'll find other places in the Bible that it's referred to as Susa, and it was a capital city at the time. It's 250 miles east of Babylon. Okay, and later it became one of the major capitals of the Medo-Persian Empire. Okay, there's two other places in the Bible where this city Shushan or Susa is mentioned. Okay, the first is in the book of Esther. Okay, Mordecai and Esther, they lived in the palace in Shushan or Susa. Okay, later, after this. Okay, so remember right now, this vision is about 550 BC. The story of Esther that we read about in the Bible happened around 479 BC. So that was about 80 years. Okay, 80 years after this, okay, that we read about the story of Esther, or 70 years after. So that took place in the same city, Shushan. Okay, we know that Nehemiah, who again came even later after Esther in the year 445 BC, the story of Nehemiah, we know that he was living at some point in Shushan, right? Because it said in Nehemiah 1 verse 1, it says, "It came to pass in the month of Chislev in the 20th year, as I was in Shushan the citadel." Okay, so we know that this area, Shushan, like a lot of different events and things took place in this city. "Then I lifted my eyes and saw, and there standing beside the river was a ram, which had 2 horns, and the 2 horns were high, but one was higher than the other, and the higher one came up last." Okay, so what do these 2 horns represent? Anyone want to wager a guess?
Old Testament?
No, Remember, all of these symbols have to do with nations. Okay.
Would be Persia and the Medes.
Yes, the Persians and the Medes. Okay. Each one represents a nation, the Persians and the Medes. Okay. So Cyrus was the king of Persia, and when we spoke about Darius, we said that some people interpret him as being like a co-regent or like a king at the same time as Cyrus, where Cyrus was responsible for coming from Persia, and Darius was responsible for the Medes, and that Darius is the one who came and conquered Babylon. Okay, so that's how when we get King Darius. Okay, before Cyrus, right, before Persians actually came to power, okay, Media was already like a major force, while Persia was still a small country holding less than 50,000 square miles of territory. Okay, so Cyrus was smaller, okay, while Media was larger, and then Cyrus, or the Persians, they grew in power. Okay, Cyrus succeeded in gaining control of Media to the north, okay, and then made Persia the more important of the two states. With these nations united, he established the vast Medo-Persian Empire. Okay, so when it says that one of them was higher than another, it's speaking about how there was a power differential between the two. Okay, how it started out that Media was very powerful, whereas Persia was not. Okay, so here the nation that came up last, meaning Persia, because Persia started small and grew to be big, actually ended up becoming the stronger one. Okay, just like here in the horns. Okay, saying it was a ram which had two horns, and the two horns were high, but one was higher than the other, and the higher one came up last. Right? So again, the higher one represents which kingdom? Persia. Okay, because it came up last. The Persian Empire gained dominance, and after Media. So the Persians started small, became big, just like the horn would start small, become big, and become bigger than the other. Okay, if you remember in the previous chapter, okay, we also read about the Persians and the Medes. Okay, do you remember one of those creatures, the four animals that we saw represented the Persians and the Medes, the Medo-Persian Empire? Do you remember which one it was? Which of the four?
The bear.
The bear. Okay, the bear, because it was the second one. Okay, and we read something about the bear that also was pointing to the idea that there was like a power difference between the two. You remember? It was in verse 5, Daniel 7:5.
The three ribs?
Well, the three ribs represent the different nations, yes. Yeah. But the idea that one was stronger. So in verse 5 it says, and suddenly another beast, a second, like a bear, it was raised up on one side. So the idea that on one side of the bear was raised up, again, represents that Persia was stronger than Media. Also, this nation is represented in the very first vision, right? What was the very first vision in Daniel that we read about?
The statue.
The statue, right? It was made up of different metals. Okay, so the Medo-Persian Empire is which one there?
Silver.
The silver. Okay, so we see again a series of visions that God is giving different people, Nebuchadnezzar, Daniel, and they're all pointing to the same thing. From the very beginning, God is saying there's going to be these four nations, and ultimately the kingdom of God is going to rule over them. It's going to destroy them. Okay, so whether it be the silver of the statue, or whether it be the bear in the previous prophecy, or whether it be the two horns here, right? It's all like focusing on the similar kind of message. Okay, so there's this ram. I saw the ram pushing westward, northward, southward, so that no animal could withstand him, nor was there any that could deliver from his hand, but he did according to his will and became great. Okay. So what does this represent? The ram pushing in all these directions. Expansion. Okay? And they were expanding quickly. The kingdom was expanding. So the Medo-Persians, they took over the Babylonians and they became the next power, right? So they're the ones that are expanding. And none of these nations were able to withstand him, just like saying no animal could withstand him. Just like in real life, the kingdom was growing and no other nation could kind of resist. Here also, saying no other animal could withstand this ram that was growing very quickly. It was said actually that the kings of Persia used to put on kind of like a helmet that looked like a ram, kind of like as a like as an honorary decorative kind of thing that he would put on. It looked like a ram, like a crown. And as I was considering, suddenly a male goat came from the west across the surface of the whole earth without touching the ground, and the goat had a notable horn between his eyes. Okay? So what do you think this goat is? Alexander the Great. So the goat represents which kingdom? Greeks. The Greek kingdom. Okay? So this is the third kingdom, right? We had the Babylonians, then you had the Medo-Persians, and now we have the Greeks. Okay? So it's saying what? It's coming from the west. Why is it coming from the west? Because Greece is to the west of the Medo-Persians, right? And now the next kingdom, the Greeks are coming to conquer. Okay? And what does it mean when it says without touching the ground? It means it's like moving very fast, right? Because remember, like last time we said that only within the span of like 10 years, Alexander the Great like conquered Egypt, Asia Minor, Persia, Judea, Tyre, Sidon, Gaza, Samaria, Cyrene, Lycia, Miletus, Gadara, Syria, and Tarsus. Like all of those regions, the Greeks, Alexander the Great, was able to conquer them very fast, without touching the ground. Then he came to the ram that had the two horns, which I had seen standing beside the river, and ran at him with furious power. Okay, in 332 BC, Alexander the Great, he attacked the Persian Empire, the Medo-Persians. Okay, 332 BC. Remember, here we are in let's say 550 BC. Okay, so this is almost 200 years later. 270 years later, right? That this is going to happen. 220 years later. 220 years later. That this is going to happen, and this is a prophecy that Daniel is seeing now. And I saw him confronting the ram. He was moved with rage against him, attacked the ram, and broke his two horns. There was no power in the ram to withstand him, but he cast him down to the ground and trampled him, and there was no one that could deliver the ram from his hand. Okay, so the Persians, they lost their influence, and the Greeks replaced them as the next like superpower. The next world power was the Greeks. Again, just like in the very first vision, where there's a sequence of kingdoms one after the other. Therefore, the male goat grew very great. But when he became strong, the large horn was broken off, and in place of it, 4 notable ones came up toward the 4 winds of heaven. So what do you think this could be?
4 Greek generals who succeeded Alexander.
Good. So Alexander the Great was represented by the horn. Okay? And actually, it's said in history that in 324 BC, Alexander the Great, he declared himself to be a god. Okay? And he demanded that all these different provinces under him worship him. Okay? And this produced some resentment from the people and also from his military leaders. Okay? So in 323 BC, he ended up dying of a fever. Okay? And at that point, left a big power vacuum. And so these 4 generals, like the kingdom was divided into 4, okay, and given to the generals. Why? Because Alexander, he had 2 sons, okay, but they were murdered, okay. And then after a lot of infighting among like his generals and stuff, 15 of his generals were murdered, and there was left 4 generals that were going to end up taking the kingdom, and they were going to divide the kingdom into 4, 1 for each general. Okay, so the 4 areas were Macedonia, which is Greece, Turkey, Syria, and Egypt. Okay, those are the 4 major areas. And Syria is what is going to become the Seleucid Empire, which is what we spoke about before. Okay. And out of them came a little horn, which grew exceedingly great toward the south, toward the east, and toward the glorious land. Okay, what do you think the little horn represents?
Is it the same as the little horn from last chapter?
Yes.
The Antichrist?
The Antichrist. Now remember from last time we said that not every, but a lot of these prophecies, they have multiple fulfillments in different ways. Okay? So this prophecy actually is fulfilled in more than one way. So the Antichrist is like the final fulfillment of this. Okay, what is the more contemporary fulfillment of this prophecy? We also spoke about him when we studied a different book.
I thought we were going to talk about the Romans.
No, not yet. This is not yet.
Oh,
There is.
Antiochus,
Antiochus. Okay, so who's Antiochus?
the Seleucid Empire's leader.
Yeah, so after the kingdom was split into four, one of the four regions was Syria, became the Seleucid Empire, and down the road in 175 BC, this is when Antiochus IV becomes God, or becomes king of the Seleucid Empire. Okay, and he sees himself as a god. Right? He sees himself as being like a godlike figure. Okay. So he is this little horn. And why was he called little? He was called little because he started out like very obscurely, very insignificantly, and he gained the throne not by normal means. Like he gained the throne because of bribery, and he became kind of prominent. And he is considered to be like a symbol of the Antichrist. Okay. So out of one of them came a little horn. So out of one of the four, right, the Seleucid, came a little horn who became kind of exceedingly great. This is Antiochus IV. And it grew up to the host of heaven, and it cast down some of the host and some of the stars to the ground and trampled them. Okay? What does the stars represent? What is the stars that he is casting to the ground and trampling them?
The faithful?
The faithful, right? The stars represent, if you want to call it, the church of the Old Testament. Okay, the faithful Jews, right? The ones that were trying to maintain the faith, and yet many fell, right? And many turned away from the faith and followed Antiochus and became, instead of being faithful to their religion, they abandoned their religion and they went and followed after him and became Hellenized, became like adopting the Greek culture and rejecting their own culture. Okay, and he killed many of the faithful Jews. He even exalted himself as high as the prince of the host, and by him the daily sacrifices were taken away, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down. Okay, so in 169 BC, Antiochus declared himself to be a god. Okay, and again, this symbolizes what the Antichrist is going to do. Okay, he invaded Jerusalem in 168 BC. He desecrated the temple. He took all the altar vessels. He set up an idol of Zeus in the temple. Okay, we read about all of this in First Maccabees when we studied First Maccabees. Okay, Daniel later on in the book, in chapters 11 and 12, he refers to the idol that was set up in the temple as by a name. So we know what the name is. He says.
What? Can you please say that?
So this idol that Antiochus sets up into the temple, Daniel refers to it, okay, in chapters 11 and 12, okay? And this is also referred to by Christ, again, multiple fulfillments. It is the fulfillment of Antiochus in the temple historically, and is also what the Antichrist is to do, is to set up something, okay?
Are you saying
Abomination of desolation.
Abomination of desolation, yes. Okay. So at the time, whenever Antiochus set up this idol in the temple, he desecrated the temple. Okay. He desecrated the temple and he set up this abomination of desolation. Okay. I believe it's even referred to as that in First Maccabees. Okay. In later on in these prophecies of Daniel, he also refers to it as the abomination of desolation. And Christ refers to the Antichrist coming as that he is setting up the abomination of desolation, right? So again, we see the comparison between Antiochus as Antichrist, right, who fulfills this prophecy literally, and the Antichrist who is to come, who fulfills it, later again. Okay. Also, there's another spiritual interpretation for abomination of desolation, right? So, what is the abomination of desolation? It was something to defile the house of God, right? The temple of God. Where the temple of God is, the house of God, something is coming to defile it. So this abomination of desolation is actually sin, because we are the house of God. We are temples of the Holy Spirit, receiving the Holy Spirit. And when we sin, it's like we set up this abomination. There's like an abomination inside of us, who is the temple of God, who is blaspheming against God. right? So in the second coming, when Scripture speaks about how there's many people who are going to fall away, even the elect and all these people, this is the abomination, right? The abomination is set up in the hearts of the people. It's not just some physical object in the temple, because we are the temple of God now in the New Testament. Because of transgression, an army was given over to the horn to oppose the daily sacrifices. And he cast truth down to the ground. He did all this and prospered. Okay? So why is it that all of this is coming upon the Jews?
Because of this transgression.
Because of transgression. Whose transgression?
The transgression of Judah or Israel.
Yeah, of the Jews. Right? So when you why is it this happened historically? Because of transgression. Right? An army was given over to the horn to oppose the daily sacrifices, and he cast truth down to the ground. He did all this and prospered. So God is allowing him to succeed, right? Just like God has allowed Nebuchadnezzar to succeed, and God considered Nebuchadnezzar to be his servant. So here, when the people sin against God, there is repercussion, there's consequence for the sin. And he's saying all of this happened because of transgression. Then I heard a holy one speaking, and another holy one said to the certain one who was speaking, how long will the vision be concerning the daily sacrifices and the transgression of desolation, the giving of both the sanctuary and the host to be trampled underfoot? Right? So in this vision, he sees like someone is speaking, like an angel is speaking, and there's another angel that's speaking to the first angel, and he's saying, how long will this vision be? Like, how long is this going to happen for? Like, asking this question. And he said to me, for 2,300 days, then the sanctuary shall be cleansed. Okay. Sharif is getting out the calculator. So, what is the significance of 2,300 days?
Our number 6 was here.
So, what are the two times that we spoke about last week? Right? We said that the people of God are going to be warred against by the Antichrist for a specific amount of time.
For a time and times and a half a time.
Time, times, and half a time. Okay. And we said that time represents what?
3.5 days or 3.5.
3.5 years. Like St. Jerome says that each of those times is 1 year. So time is 1 year. Times, plural, is 2 years. And half a time is half a year, 6 months. Okay. So 1 plus 2 plus half is 3.5. Okay. So in the book of Daniel, it's referring to the time that this transgression, the time that this suffering, this tribulation is going to last is 3.5 years. Okay, we compared that to the book of Revelation, chapter 13, and in there it also had a time frame. Okay, do you remember what the time frame was? It was a number of months.
42 months.
42 months, which is how long? 3.5 years. Okay, so when we compare the two prophecies, the times match. Okay, what about here? It says for 2,300 days, right? This is the answer. When you're saying how long will all this happen? How long will it last? For 2,300 days. Okay, so what is 2,300 days? 2,300 days represents 6 years and 3 months. Okay, which is the period of time since when Antiochus attacked the temple until he was conquered by Judas Maccabees. Okay, but the literal translation of 2,300 days is 2,300 evenings and mornings. Okay, 2,300 evenings and mornings. So actually, if you look at the number of days, it's 1150. Okay, it's half of 2,300. Because if you interpret it that way as 2,300 evenings and mornings, each day has an evening and has a morning. So if you look at what is the total number of days, it's half of this number, which is 1150. Okay. Saint Hippolytus of Rome, he thinks that 2300 mornings and evenings means 1150 days, which is 2300 divided by 2, where the morning and evening daily sacrifices were prohibited during the persecution. This is equal to the 3.5 years where Judas and Maccabees cleansed the temple. Okay, so essentially we're saying what? That this 1150 days is the equivalent of the 3.5 years. Right? And it's also the amount of time from when Antiochus came to power and destroyed the temple until when Judas destroyed him. So there's many, many different parallels here in this prophecy.
So there, a day and a day off, that's the sacrifice?
Yeah, like there's a morning sacrifice and there's an evening sacrifice. And when Antiochus came and destroyed the temple and he prevented the worship, right? He desecrated the temple and prevented people from worshiping. How long? Right? Did he prevent them from worshiping? 2300 mornings and evenings, meaning 2300 sacrifices were not offered, right? Because they would offer a sacrifice in the morning and they would offer a sacrifice in the evening. So for 1150 days, they were not able to offer sacrifice because Antiochus prevented them to in the book of Maccabees. So he's saying that is the same time period. So the 3.5 years that is referred to as being the period of time where the Antichrist will make war against the saints is the same 3.5 years that the Jews were not allowed to worship God in the temple during the book of Maccabees. And it's the same 42 months that is prophesied about by St. John in Revelation. Okay, so all of these three kind of things line up together and they point to two things. They point to this is the amount of time that the Jews were not able to worship in Maccabees, and it's the amount of time that the saints will be attacked and warred against by the Antichrist in the second coming, like before the second coming.
So there might be a time where 3.5 years we won't have mass.
I don't know what it means.
Okay.
I mean, I can't say that we know what that's going to represent. Okay, but the same time period. The point that I'm getting at is how Antiochus is a symbol of the Antichrist. That everything that's happening with the Antichrist is also going to happen with Antiochus is also going to happen with the Antichrist. So after this period of time, then it says the sanctuary shall be cleansed, right? Because they actually, this is exactly spoken about in Maccabees, that after they drove out the Seleucids, okay, they cleansed the temple. Right? Because they weren't going to use it in its current state. Like they purified the temple, they cleansed it, and then they began offering sacrifices again. Then it happened, when I, Daniel, had seen the vision and was seeking the meaning, that suddenly there stood before me one having the appearance of a man. Okay? And I heard a man's voice between the banks of the Ulai, remember that was the river that was mentioned at the beginning, who called and said, Gabriel, make this man understand the vision. So this one who looks like a man, okay, he is the Son of God, okay, and he is speaking to his angel Gabriel, and he's telling Gabriel, make this man to understand, okay, the vision. So he came near where I stood, and when he came, I was afraid and fell on my face. But he said to me, understand, Son of Man, that the vision refers to the time of the end. Okay? St. Jerome speaks about this. He said, since Ezekiel, Daniel, and Zechariah were always in the company of angels, God wanted to remind them of their weaknesses, lest they fall in pride and think that they partake of the angelic nature or dignity. That is why they were called sons of men. So whenever here, like the angel Gabriel, he's referring to him as a son of man, St. Jerome is saying that he's doing this to humble him, to remind him that he's still a human being. Like even though he is seeing visions and he's seeing angels and hearing voices, like all this stuff, to kind of ground him and remind him that he is still a human being, and it's not like his nature has changed to become like an angel, anything like that. Okay, so he's saying this vision that you're seeing is referring to the time of the end. Now, as he was speaking with me, I was in a deep sleep with my face to the ground, but he touched me and stood upright. This is very similar to the experience that St. John had in the book of Revelation. That, like when St. John is seeing all the stuff he's seeing, he's like falling on the ground because it's just too overwhelming for him. And he said, look, I am making known to you what shall happen in the latter time of the indignation. For at the appointed time the end shall be. The ram which you saw, having the 2 horns, they are the kings of Media and Persia. So he's actually interpreting this to him. They are the kings of Media and Persia. And the male goat is the kingdom of Greece. The large horn that is between its eyes is the first king, right? So we said, who is the first king? Alexander the Great. As for the broken horn and the 4 that stood up in its place, 4 kingdoms shall arise out of that nation, but not with its power, right? So we already said that. We said that there's 4 generals that are going to come after Alexander, right? But they're not going to be as strong as he was. And in the latter time of their kingdom, when the transgressors have reached their fullness, a king shall arise, having fierce features, who understands sinister schemes. Okay? So when the transgressors have reached their fullness, okay, a king shall rise, having fierce features, who understands sinister schemes. Okay? So this is referring to what? This is referring again to the Antichrist. Right? This is the one who is going to rise when the transgressors have reached their fullness. Like when the time is right and like the world is in sin, okay, like in deep sin, okay, then this ultimate Antichrist is gonna come, and he's gonna what? Understand sinister schemes. Remember how before we were saying about the Antichrist that he's gonna speak pompous words? Like he's gonna come and he's going to like convince the world of his way. He's going to convince the world and have these schemes in mind to make everybody to follow after him so that he is like attractive to people. This is why like when people are thinking about like the Antichrist, they shouldn't be thinking that he's going to be this person who's going to come, that it's going to be obvious and we're all going to look at him and say, oh, this is the Antichrist and we should run away from him. No, actually, he's going to be so attractive and so like what he says is going to make sense. People are going to want to go after him. Right? And it said that perhaps even the whole world is going to go after him. Some people even say maybe he's going to become like the first like world leader. I mean, we don't have a world leader, right? But he's going to be so attractive that everyone is going to want to follow him. His power shall be mighty, but not by his own power. What does that mean?
By Satan's power.
By the power of Satan, right? So the reason why he is like able to be as influential as he is because Satan is giving him that influence, right? He's deceiving the people, right? Which is what Satan does. Satan is a deceiver, right? That is his job, is he deceives. So essentially he is going to work to deceive the world and to make them think that this man is so good and has to be followed. Now I'll ask this question. How do you think it is possible for the devil to deceive an entire world of people to believe in this one man?
He's going to do miracles. That's one of the things. And
It would have worked for us.
What do you mean?
There's been lots of miracles from God. It would have worked for him. How would it work for him? For the Antichrist then?
I mean, there's miracles that happens a lot, but people don't believe them. So what is it that going to make it work for him?
Control them financially.
Okay, it could be something financial.
Or maybe he says something that everyone wants to hear, so they'll like him and follow him.
Yes, he says something that everybody likes to hear, right? Because he's deceiving. He's telling us what we want to hear. Let me ask it this way: like, do you think that if the Antichrist were to appear at any point in time, that the deception is going to only be within his lifetime? Or there's going to have already been a deception from before?
Yeah, there's deception from before.
Deception from before. So, because in order for someone to be deceived, you can't go 180 degrees.
You have to be indoctrinated.
Yes, you have to slowly be deceived, right? Over a long period of time to where you don't even feel that you're being deceived, right? Like, have you heard the analogy of like, if you put a frog in hot water, it's just going to jump out of the water because it's hot. But if you put a frog in cold water and then you very, very slowly heat the water, it's not going to feel it, even if the water is boiling, and it'll just stay in the water and die, right? Because the water temperature is changing so gradually. And that's what's happening in the world, right? What's happening in the world is with every day and with every generation, there are these subtle, gradual changes that, is acceptable just because each one of them is small. Now, some of them are not that small, but it's smaller then if you try to say we're going to go from the culture of the 1800s to the culture of the 21st century all at once, right? It wouldn't have worked. People would have rejected that, right? But the culture that we have, the gradual changing, right? So this is why each of the small things that happens around us, like that we read about in the media and happening in society, is so important, because everything is just one step, right? And one step each generation. Remember, this is the time scale here that we're talking about is thousands of years. This deception has been going on for thousands of years, right? And each generation is one more part of the deception. And God sees, right? This is why, like God is revealing so much about this idea of nations and this idea of generations in the future, because he's saying, I see ahead of time the deception is coming. Like I see the Antichrist is coming. And I know what is going to happen. And I'm preparing you ahead of time. Preparing you doesn't mean you live your life, however, and then suddenly you think, oh, this person is the Antichrist, we're not going to listen to him. Because you've already been indoctrinated. You already believe the same thing that the Antichrist believes. That's why it's going to be natural for people to follow him, because his message is not going to be something contrary to what people already believe. His message is going to be exactly what they believe. And he's going to come and say everything that we already believe. And that's why it's going to resonate with so many people. And in Revelation, he speaks about how even the elect are going to suffer. And Christ speaks about how even the elect are going to follow after him. The elect is who? The elect is the Christians, right? So even Christians, right, are going to believe him. Even Christians are going to go after him. Even Christians. Why? Because they've already been deceived from before. This is why it's so important for us to always be very careful about what ideas we go after, okay?
It's like the sexual revolution or the highest court in all the world saying love wins or whatever.
Exactly.
That's like that. It's a scary time ahead of us.
Yes, right. That's a perfect example, okay? Because not only is sin done, because sin has been done all along, right? But sin is now accepted as being good, right?
Yeah, but a real Christian would not be deceived, right? A real Christian
They would say
can
Why?
say all these things.
Adam and Eve were deceived from the very beginning, and they were what? Pure in nature, and they lived with God, and God walked with them in the Garden of Eden, and they saw God with their eyes. Like we say we have to have faith to believe in God. They saw him with their eyes. They heard his voice, they heard God's voice, and they knew it, right? And yet they were still deceived, right? Because our nature is one of weakness. We are weak. We are weak by nature, right? This is why we're so easily deceived. And this is why we have to always remind ourselves every day of what is this world that we're living in, and what is my purpose here, and where am I going, and what, So it's very easy for the devil to deceive us, because we have this, we have these desires, right? And all he does is he offers us something that we desire, and we lose our mind, right? He offered Eve this simple fruit, even though she had thousands of other trees to eat from, and yet just because this fruit was forbidden, it made it all the more attractive. And so I want to eat from this, right? And this is a special tree. It's the tree of knowledge. What is going to happen if I eat of this tree? And the devil is coming to tell me, oh, if you eat of this tree, you're going to become like God. What an attractive proposition. This is actually why he fell, because he wanted to be God.
But now we know the tricks of the enemy, so we're not easily deceived.
But we still sin every day.
We do.
Because it's not about just the knowing.
But not to the point that it can separate us from God, right?
People don't like to be called bigots. That's why a lot of Christians inside the church don't have a problem with homosexual marriage or all these kind of things. You'll be surprised about the ways that people make bad things elusive and okay.
There's actually, when it comes to the homosexual, accepting the homosexual, there's actually a book that was written by the homosexual community called After the Ball. This book talks about how they plan to deceive society to accept this as normal. And they were very open with it. So this is how we're going to do it. And they had different psychological techniques that they used, and it's still ongoing, in order to get people to accept something that's unnatural and to make them feel like...
But it's spilled out of the Bible.
Yes, but
it's not hidden.
But people will even interpret the Bible in different ways so that they justify it. You know?
Actually, if you wait till the end of the chapter, it will tell you that Daniel still didn't understand.
I have a personal opinion about obedience in the church. I think obedience is not about the obedience to the pastors or the servants in the church. It's about the obedience to God.
Mm-hmm.
But it changed through generations. And it's now the obedience to parents and the older people. And it made the new generations, they are weak and they don't have strong personality, and they don't have a strong personality to face the world, and they are not strong enough to understand how to be strong enough to be knowledgeable, to be not manipulated by others. So when they read books, they can easily absorb what anybody want to give them. Like, I'm open to discuss anything with anybody, but mostly people can't convince me with what they want me to get. I worked in a lot of companies, and they always want me to steal people, but they always try to convince me by manipulation. I always catch it, and I say no. But they convince hundreds of people.
And they convince based on the idea that it's love, because they twist.
Yeah.
They twist it. They say they tell you the definition of love is just do everything that makes other people feel good.
Yeah,
Okay?
but it's not.
So I mean, I don't want to get too far down in this direction, but the idea of the deception is something that's ongoing and already happening, right? It's not something that's going to start when the Antichrist is born. It's not like a deception that's going to be like the Antichrist is the first person who's ever going to say this. But the way he says it and the influence that he has, it's going to like capture the minds of the people and make them want to follow him in a way maybe greater and more than any other leader or any other person has ever done before. Yeah.
But didn't God put this hierarchy in the church? We will follow the leaders because God told us to. So I don't see any problem with that.
Yeah, so I mean, to this point specifically, like, the idea is to follow God, but God told us to follow authority. Like, even in the Bible, you know, St. Paul says, follow the authority, right? So this authority that we're following, he actually tells us even to follow non-godly authority. Like he says, follow your government, right? Even though the government might not be telling us to do something that's godly, we follow it as long as it's not against God. Okay? So
the same thing goes for the leaders of the church. If they're not teaching God's word or going against it, we're not going to follow them.
yeah, but no, that's true. Like if they're teaching the people to do against God's words, then we don't follow them. Right. But most of the time when people are rejecting the authority of the church is not because what they're saying is against what God is saying, just because they don't like that opinion.
That's true.
Okay? So but the focus that I'm talking about is sinful influence. I'm not talking about just, okay, I don't like this economy, I don't like this way, I don't like these opinions, but I'm talking about like the what's become ingrained in society, right? Like I saw yesterday even, there was this game where you can select your gender, okay, and instead of saying select man or select woman, it just said select body type, and one of the body types was a male body type, and the other body type was a female body type. But they didn't even want to call it male or female or man or woman. They just said it's different body type. I have a different body type than you. That's it, right? That like kind of sinister, subtle message, like that influences young people, that teaches them from a very young age that there isn't men and women. We're just different body types. Okay, it's very destructive, and it's something that more and more is being accepted as mainstream, and that deception is accelerating, right? So the point is that the deception, we have to be vigilant about the deception now, because sometimes people's obsession with the whole idea of the end times and all of that is they're obsessed with finding out what is the date, and obsessed with finding out who is the Antichrist. Is this person the Antichrist? Is this person the Antichrist? It's not. That's not even the issue. The issue is that the spirit of the Antichrist, which Christ speaks about, the spirit of the Antichrist is already in the world, right? Maybe the Antichrist person himself is not in the world yet. We don't know. But the spirit of the Antichrist is already in the world and is already infiltrating people's minds, so that when the actual Antichrist comes, it's going to be an easy job for him, right? It's not going to be difficult. So his power shall be mighty, not by his own power, because Satan is the one working behind the scenes. Okay? He shall destroy fearfully, and shall prosper and thrive. He shall destroy the mighty and also the holy people. Okay, this is what he's saying. Like when you're speaking about the Christians are not going to be deceived, he's destroying the holy people. Okay. Through his cunning, he shall cause deceit to prosper under his rule, and he shall exalt himself in his heart. He shall destroy many in their prosperity. He shall even rise against the prince of princes, but he shall be broken without human means. Okay, so again, like there is dual meaning here. There's multiple fulfillments of this prophecy. Okay, so first let's look at it from the perspective of Antiochus. Okay, so from the perspective of Antiochus, okay, he sent, 22,000 people to Jerusalem under the guise that he wanted peace. And we read about this in 1 Maccabees. Okay, he told them that he wanted to make peace. He sent people to Jerusalem to make peace, right? But they betrayed them, okay, and they attacked them, okay. On one of the Sabbath days, they knew that the Jews would be worshiping, and they knew that the Jews could not fight or do anything on the Sabbath day, so they would attack them specifically on the Sabbath day to slaughter them. Okay? So this is the deceit, right? He is cunning. He has deceit. He exalted himself. He's prideful. He considered himself to be a god, remember, like what we said? Okay? And he destroyed many people, and he even rose up against God himself, right? The Prince of Princes. But in the end, he shall be broken without human means, okay? Antiochus died of a severe pain, like in his body, okay? And he ended up dying not because he was, like, killed by another person. He died of a disease. So he died without human means. The same is true about the Antichrist, right? He's going to be deceptive, okay? And deceit is going to prosper. Everyone's going to be mindlessly following this man and believing that what he is saying is true and even good. Okay, and he is prideful, exalting himself, right? And he will destroy many. He will cast many down. And he is exalting himself even against God. Okay, but in the end, God will destroy him, right? In the end, God is going to end him. And the vision of the evenings and mornings which was told is true. Therefore, seal up the vision, for it refers to many days in the future. Okay, and I, Daniel, fainted and was sick for days. After I arose and went about the king's business, I was astonished by the vision, but no one understood it. Okay? I want to give you a few comparisons by reading some verses from the New Testament that speak about the Antichrist, and we can kind of compare it to everything that we've read about Antiochus. Okay? We read in this chapter in verse 24 that Antiochus had great power. Okay, but we read that Antichrist will actually have greater power. In 2 Thessalonians 2:9, it says, "The coming of the lawless one is according to the work of Satan, with all power, signs, and lying wonders." Okay, so Antiochus was powerful. Antichrist is powerful. Also, both of them destroyed thousands. Okay, in Revelation 13, it says about the Antichrist, "He was granted power to give breath to the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause as many as would not worship the image of the beast to be killed." Okay? This image of the beast, he is the Antichrist. That the image of the beast should speak and cause as many as would not worship the image of the beast to be killed. He's destroying thousands. Okay? Just like Antiochus did. Also, Antiochus persecuted the saints. I mean, he persecuted the Jews. He went after them. He tried to wipe out the religion from the face of the earth. Okay? Antichrist is going to do the same. It says, "It was granted to him to make war with the saints and to overcome them. And authority was given to him over every tribe, tongue, and nation." Right? So again, just as Antiochus did, also the Antichrist is going to do. Antiochus was a deceiver. Okay? In verse 25, right? We read about that. And then Antichrist will also be a deceiver. Okay, it says in Revelations 19, "Then the beast was captured, and with him the false prophet, who worked signs in his presence, by which he deceived those who received the mark of the beast and those who worshipped his image." Right? We read about in the Revelation the mark of the beast. Remember, what is the mark of the beast?
666.
The symbol 666 that gets put on the forehead of each person. Okay? And who are the ones that are consenting, right? This was consensual, like I am agreeing that you would come and put the mark of the beast on me, right? Because I believe that the mark of the beast is something good. I don't consider it as the mark of the beast. I consider it as something good that I want, right? And these are the people that he is deceiving. That's why it says who worked signs in his presence, by which he deceived those who received the mark of the beast and those who worshipped his image. Meaning, this is part of the deception, right? Remember, the deception is already happening. The deception is not something that's going to happen in the future only. Also, we read in verse 25 in this chapter that Antiochus was very proud. Actually, he called himself Antiochus IV Epiphanes. Epiphanes means God manifest. Like, he considered himself to be divine, that he, even in his name, like, he is like God. Okay? The Antichrist will be one of the most arrogant people the world has ever seen. In 2 Thessalonians it says, who opposes and exalts himself above all that is called God or that is worshipped, so that he sits as God in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. Right? Like, the Antichrist is going to be very, like, open to the idea that he is almost like a divine. Okay? And people are going to follow him. Also, Antiochus blasphemed God. Okay? And Antichrist will also blaspheme God. Antiochus was not killed by human hands, and also the Antichrist will not be killed by human hands. We read also in 2 Thessalonians, and then the lawless one will be revealed, whom the Lord will consume with the breath of his mouth and destroy with the brightness of his coming. Right? This is what St. Paul said about the Antichrist, that the brightness of the coming of Christ is going to destroy the Antichrist. Okay? So we see there are so many similarities between Antiochus as a symbol of the Antichrist and the Antichrist himself. Why do you think this is the case? Why do you think God did that? Like, it's one thing to see, okay, we have prophecies about something that's to come in the future. Okay, we understand that. We want to prepare for something that comes in the future. But why did he allow all of these prophecies to have a dual meaning, to where, like, it was fulfilled in the life of this man, Antiochus, and it will be fulfilled in the life of the Antichrist in the future?
So we kind of have an idea of what's coming.
Good, right? Like, when you see just like a prophecy, it might be a prophecy about something you can't comprehend or understand, right? But when you see it fulfilled in the life of a human being, then you have to say, well, you know what? The actual Antichrist is going to be even worse than this. Like, I couldn't comprehend how bad this was going to be, but now that you showed me an example of how bad this was, then I can at least try to imagine how bad it's going to be in the future, and even worse, right? So the idea of us looking, and that's why, like, one of the important reasons we studied First Maccabees is to see the suffering that the Jews went through and how difficult it was for them, and yet how they were able to prevail through their faith, right? That the Jews, their civilization continued, their faith continued because God was with them, and they continued in faith to the end, right? And the whole book was that same message. The whole book was about how there were some that were deceived, but some that were not deceived, and they remained faithful and kept attacking and defending themselves against the Seleucids all the way until the very end, and they were able to repel them away from their land. Okay, this is the same story of the end, right? Because Antiochus represents the Antichrist coming to destroy God's people. Okay, so here we are the church, and the Antichrist is coming to destroy us. Okay, and yet if we remain faithful to the end, then we will repel him. Okay, and he will not have any control over us. Any questions about this chapter?
But it's saying that he didn't understand it, and like, I was listening to His Grace Bishop Yusuf's sermon on talking about John, and he was talking about Revelations when he was coming here, and he was talking about like how Revelations is like, yes, it's talking about a real thing, but the seal is not open, or he didn't use that word. He said like, it's more, we can get a spiritual meaning from it, not a literal meaning, because we wouldn't see it coming, like Daniel saying none understood it, and it was sealed.
That's true. I mean, here actually it says also it was sealed, right? Therefore, seal up the vision. And here, at least, the Archangel Gabriel, he gave Daniel some of the meaning, right? He didn't explain everything. But for instance, he said that the two horns represent Persia and Media, because that was now that was in the present time. Persia and Media existed in the present time. And so when the angel tells Daniel, he understands, Then he says there will be a kingdom to come after. So that's in the future. So they can't use names, or I mean, I guess he could, but they wouldn't know what the names were, right? Which we know is Greece, and we know is Alexander the Great, and we know the 4 generals that came Alexander the Great and all of that. So a lot of that vision.
I think he mentions it either in this chapter or the next. He
Well,
mentions Greece in particular.
yeah, so what I mean is that there's at least some of the vision can be comprehended and is directly like the angel is pointing to him and saying, look, this is what it means. Whereas in Revelation, it's very, very much up to interpretation, of what does it mean. But why was it written? What does God want us to get from it, right? Even if we don't understand all of the details of the prophecy, we still benefit from it spiritually, because essentially the message to us is be ready. Be ready, because there's going to be a lot of stuff that's going to happen, and it's going to be a difficult time for the church. Okay? Whether we understand all of the details and the times and everything that's said and what it means, it doesn't really change the overall message of the book, which is be ready. Okay? Watch, right? Be alert. So same is true here. He's giving him this message because he wants him to be ready. Right? And he's writing it down for our behalf so we can read it and we say, okay, we need to be ready. And just as we see the fulfillment happen in the life of Antiochus, this makes us more faithful and more believing that it's going to happen in the life of the Antichrist. Right? Like that's another reason why this would be having these multiple fulfillments. Because both those fulfillments were in the future at the time. Like we now look in the past and we see, okay, Alexander the Great and the 4 generals and Greece and Romans and all of this, right? And we know we can identify the fulfillment of that prophecy in hindsight because we are now in the future. But we don't necessarily know what's going to be at the end times. So he's saying just as this initial prophecy, part of the prophecy was fulfilled, so also believe that the coming prophecy also will be fulfilled. And so that's why be ready. Like don't just wait around. Be prepared. Any other comments or questions? Okay. Glory be to God forever. Let's pray.